awesome. Thanks again for joining. And as I said, I'm going to jump right in. I gave, I think, a brief overview yesterday during the UX call. Didn't have a lot of time to chat about all these plans and what we're doing for settings. But I think it's awesome that I have the opportunity to talk to you because growth took over navigation, right? As part of the not owned functionalities. And for settings, I think kind of trying to do the same thing. It's still, or it's debatable. I think that's going to change, but it's still labeled as a group not owned. And Nadia and I started with this initiative to look into the existing issues and UX proposals, research, everything for navigation, for settings. And that's what you can find in the epic. And then pretty much during these calls, as you see in the agenda doc, I just want to talk to you a little bit so we can maybe gather more information on what's the state of settings right now in different stage groups, and then validate together with Catherine's research, let's say the main topics or what's hot right now in settings. So we have a lot of discussions about information architecture or just visibility of settings, inconsistencies in the UI. And then during this call, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about, what type of work have you done in Grow so far and what's next and how can we help all designers in a way to get there with settings. So shoot.
I'll start since I've got the first thing in the agenda. So I did some work, so for context, I did some work for retention and growth around increasing engagement with our features, especially after a new release. And this culminated in some thinking around a what's new project. And so I've kind of linked the UI design and plus the settings issue. And I think to answer the question in the doc around what challenges did I have with the settings, really, there wasn't a place to, or an ideal place to put a particular setting. We wanted to give people the ability on a self-managed instance to be able to turn off the ability to show this to particular users. Mainly because of security reasons, especially if you have an external person that's using the instance and they know what version of the platform that you're running, it could lend some security problems. And then also because you maybe you just don't want your users to know that you're not upselling and you're not getting the most. So there are legitimate reasons why people wanted to turn this off. And we ended up placing it in the admin general settings page. And I actually need to refresh my memory because I can't remember where it lived. It lived in the general settings page under visibility and access controls. And by the way, when you say settings, these are the types of settings that you're talking about. Yeah, okay, good. Just making sure. And if you look at that, I mean, in the issue, it lists out how long that segment is inside of the UI. It's got so many different things. It's almost like an airplane cockpit. So many different knobs and widgets and different checkboxes and radio buttons. And then I felt really just uncomfortable putting our setting right at the bottom of that whole list. So that was a big challenge. I really wanted to maybe create another compartment or category and maybe fix up some of the hierarchy. But as you know, the way we work with MVC, that just wasn't going to be possible in the time frame that we had. That would have been like a much longer, in-depth look what you're doing now. So I'm happy, very happy that you're working on this. So just to sum up, the issues I had were just that no idea really where to place. There wasn't really a framework of understanding of where to place the settings. And then also the hierarchy of when I actually got in there and found the place to put it, it's just a bit overwhelming. And I know that users are probably going to find that overwhelming as well.
And then Tim, where did you go to get help or to try to understand how settings work? given the current status of it across the product, what was your source of truth for that?
It was really engineers, because it wasn't, like you're saying, it wasn't really an owned thing. And a couple of PMs actually I reached out to, so Jeremy on Manage, I believe, and I forget who else. But it was mainly growth engineers. So another Jeremy on the growth team, and Jay, they were really helpful. They gave some kind of insights into, because some of these settings I didn't actually know what they were for, and so it was good to get some context around what was actually happening on the page. But in generally, it was mainly the engineers who were the driving force for the kind of source of truth in settings.
And other than the framework for how settings work, what do you think that might have helped you during the design process? Because we talked a bit about with other designers on having pajamas assets or having some sort of guidelines on. They are a bit more, not so much a component centered, but how this works in context with a page.
Yeah, I totally hear where you're coming from, and I think what would have helped would have been maybe to have more of this documented. The docs are really useful, but they don't explain things in a way that a product designer needs to understand for us, or especially the way that the architecture behind how the product is built. So if there was more documentation and maybe a framework around how settings should be grouped, and maybe some rules in terms of, once you get to a certain level or a certain amount of settings inside of, I'm just using the admin page as an example, inside of one of those expand collapse modules, maybe once you get beyond a certain point, it needs to be reorganized. If that was a rule, we could have baked it into our kind of engineering and design process, and it would have been something that we would have allocated time towards, and really kind of honing in and crafting the experience a little better for users. So
that's awesome. Thank you. Matej?
Yeah, so I did some stuff for settings redesign and trying to improve settings in general back when I was on Manage, right? Andreas was actually the product manager back then still. And what we were trying to do is we started with projects and group settings, just trying to make them more usable. Because when I joined, those sections that Tim just mentioned, right? If you go to settings, you'll have a couple of those expandable sections. They weren't even properly labeled. So if you're searching for something specific, you basically had no idea where to find it, even just by going through the page, either scanning it or even reading it, because it wasn't mentioned. Some things weren't mentioned that they were actually in that settings section, right? So what we did is we improved labels so that they weren't like 1 or 2 words labels, which usually were very generic. We changed them to specific and more like lists, things separated by a comma. So here you will find this, and that, right? Without here you will find, of course. And then we also updated the descriptions, because each of those sections also has a short description. So if at least you use the browser search, maybe you could find what you were looking for, but still it wasn't good enough, right? And there's an issue I know still open for a case when even the browser search doesn't actually go through all these sections and doesn't expand them if the browser finds anything in those sections, right? So that's an existing issue. So it basically makes the browser search useless. And then what we talked about for a really long time is actually implementing a proper search for those pages, where you would have a search box on the top right of the page, and you would say, I'm looking for user management, right? Like when you go to a Apple computer settings, you can actually search and it highlights the areas where you will find those things. Something like that, but we never really got far. with it, because back then manage, and I think that's still the case, manage is like a huge area of things that they work on. And we were working on so many things that we never actually had the time to tackle something so challenging. So I think this would be a really good opportunity with the newfound focus on these settings in general, right? So this is what we did back then. Settings are you most proud of? So yeah, that's basically it. We were actually able to improve, slightly improve, I should say, some of these pages. I can try to dig these issues up. I saw you pasted a couple already, and maybe that's actually those issues. We made them more usable. So now even if you just click on the title of that section, it will actually expand the section, right? You don't need to click on an actual expand button, which was quite annoying. Those were like these small improvements, which, it improved the settings page, but not enough, if you ask me. And if you go to the admin page, that's the tricky one, right? That's the huge settings page that I would assume nobody looked at in ages, and probably no one from UX, right? Because yeah, exactly. I recently took a quick look at the admin overview page, where you have the information about how many users you have there, how many projects, what features you have enabled, and those things. It's not even optimized so that sections would be nicely scaled on a mobile screen. They just get squeezed, right? And I would assume no UX person was ever involved in doing anything on that screen, for example. It's so poorly designed, right? But this might actually be something that the growth expansion team might start looking at in terms of improving navigation. And we also have an interest on improving that page, because we want to drive more upgrades to higher plans, right? And at the moment, you can't find information on how to upgrade to a higher plan for a self-hosted instance from inside the application. There's no link that will tell you, here you can read how you can do that, not even to documentation, right? So we added that recently. I think it should be implemented soon, if it wasn't already. But then the next steps will be to add a button, and it takes you to a form where you can contact our sales department, for example. So stuff like that, right? And with looking at that admin overview page, just because of these small things, I just couldn't help myself to try to, just make an improvement here or there and slightly change the visual look of it, because it's so dated, right? And it doesn't scale on mobile devices as well. There's so much we can improve there. It's just kind of waiting there for one UX person to pick it up and start working on it, basically. So we might actually take a look at that in the future. I think I even mentioned that, yeah, in the section below, where you're asking about the upcoming direction and priorities. So another thing that I know, I started this discussion, it was the members management, right? So you need to go, in the past, you needed to go to settings and members. I think it was like that in projects. You needed to go to settings, members, to manage members of that project. Now we changed it, so you have the members section in the left sidebar, the same as it is in the group, but it's still like a settings page, right? I count it as a settings page. I started the discussion of making a lot of usability improvements on that page. And it's being picked up by Manage Access, I believe, a lot of it. So that's good news. I guess that's one less for you.
Yeah, and I heard last Friday, I had a chat with Mike Nichols, and he actually mentioned this part, the member settings, that when you're, for example, setting up permissions for, I don't know, as a pipeline or for a project or group, you don't have context of the group members unless you are at the group page. So I think I'm going to find, but it's in this agenda here. There's some issue and some feedback related to that. And that's another point that I'm hearing a lot during these calls, is that we are not really good at cross-linking, or at least letting users know that, hey, once you set up something here on members, for example, your next step is to go to your group page or to your project page settings and then define permissions there, right?
Yeah.
So there is also some comments on that. And I think it relates to a little bit these general patterns that we could implement or that we could recommend. So that when you create a new page, make sure that you connect the flow with a different part of the product.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to recognize, because this is something that we started noticing a lot on growth, because we work across different features, different areas of the application, and we just noticed how things aren't connected at all. And I guess it comes naturally from one group of people working on this feature, then another group of people working on another feature. The two are kind of related in some cases, in some scenarios, and the flow should be, connecting these two features, but it never is, because nobody actually took a step back and took a look at both of these features and how both of them help our users, for example, right? So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think another challenge is also when we work only, or well, now no more, but working on MVCs, and these end up being dropped out of the MVC because you can deliver the feature without, I don't know, just making a small improvement that will connect group settings to member settings, for example. So I feel like my experience that this type of enhancements, they're always sent to the backlog, and then you pay the price with the overall user experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's my experience as well.
No. So in the main epic, actually linked here, I sent you the incorrect link before. But I think this main, these big items that we talked about, search and just the overall discoverability of settings and connecting things to different places, I grouped them in the settings UX re-architecture epic. I had to call re-architecture because redesign was a bit a bit too strong. And then I think here I've seen a lot of issues that you created in the past, Matej, like
I'm just looking at one now.
And Catherine also shared, I'm not sure if you did the research together with Catherine of it was from like your legacy, but there are a lot of things that still relate to what you say, and then indeed there's no clear ownership for it right now. So I think my plan, what I'm starting to figure out during this call is that I want to just gather this feedback and the issues where we say, okay, this is my next step for settings in growth, or my next step for settings in release management, and try to combine it so that maybe we can connect. First step, we can connect, and if you're implementing specific patterns or changing things, make sure that we are following, I don't know, one standard, or at least not changing things too much in different stage groups. But also when we talk about the themes for settings, which we pointed it as discoverability of settings, the global settings versus project settings, or like feature settings mix, the switch of the flow, the options overload, and the inconsistencies that we have in the UI. Those are like the 4-5 main topics. What I'm thinking right now is that I'm gonna just try to group our ideas and our feedbacks and our previous challenges into these buckets, so that we can, together with the leadership, try to look into the what's next. Because indeed, like search, it's such a big thing. But I think if we commit to delivering search for settings, it might not be the one thing, that can help us across the product. But yeah.
Can I ask, when you say search, do you mean search as in, and I don't mean to get into the weeds, but search as in a user initiated enter, for instance, you have to interact, or a filtering system? Like what we had for groups and projects?
Yeah, we have 2 types of issues or proposals open. Enablement, I think Sunjung shared this in the UX showcase last week, where there's a proposal to improve the global search on the top navigation, where you can also search for settings things there. So if I type
Okay.
the ICD of variables, the results are going to show, a highlight in the settings page. That's one. And then the other one is like what Matei said, that in the settings page, you can search for things there. If you do with the browser or we implement a search or filter there, there's no actual proposal, but there's two ways right now that that are proposed: global or in context with settings. But I haven't seen anyone talking about filter.
Okay. The reason when I say filtering, I don't mean like maybe like tagging or anything like that. But have you know how if you go on to like the groups or projects page in the right hand corner, I believe, and I think I need to refresh my own memory, but it's not the group, it's the overview page. Sorry, not inside of a group, but just the overall page. In the right hand corner, you have the ability to type in a name, and it kind of finds what you're looking for in line, rather than having to search rather and refresh the page, and then it shows you your results. I hope I'm making sense, by the way.
Sorry, I'm muted. Where you have I'm on the group page, and then it has a subgroup and projects, and then I have a list, and there's a search bar, right, on the page. Yeah.
But that would just be because my concern. I'm working on another project right now for usage storage and storage management of projects, and one of the issues that I had is when I proposed a filtering system. The understanding that the engineers had was that it was you type in, say, I don't know, a project's called analyst, and you type in analyst, and then you have to hit enter or interact with a go button or a submit button before we can draw those results. And I think it's a much more seamless experience happens inline. So there isn't a browser refresh, there isn't any kind of server-side refreshing. It just happens live on the page, almost like like an app format. But again, that does have quite steep technical requirements and resources as well. For
sure. And my experience with the search, the GitLab search, is that it's not there. As in, it's not Google, right? So if I want to find something on GitLab, I'll just Google it, and then I'll go back to GitLab. And Mike Nichols also shared some insights on having this contextual search that indeed would just, work almost like an autocomplete, and then you could see in the global search the result page that Sunjun is working. Then you have like a sidebar saying, if you type, for example, variables, and then you have the results appear on CI/CD variables, project variables, admin variables, and then like having a sidebar. Then you select in context. I'll find that proposal.
Cool.
Oh, it's actually here. Let me. But then again, I feel like it's a very big thing to implement. And I really wonder, like now, without looking at, without having a clear vision for it, as a designer, I wonder if this is our low-hanging fruit, if search for settings is. My experience as a user, as a GitLab user, I think the information architecture of settings and this connectivity with other parts in the product, would solve maybe more problems than search. But I definitely see the value. It's here. Let me add to the chat. I think it clicks. So Mike shared, I think this is a VS Code, and he said that you have this super powerful way to search inline.
Yeah, that's literally I would say the best case scenario. And I would have felt totally more comfortable when I was working on the previous project with the what's new component. If that was indeed, there was a way to search easily. That would have kind of mitigated some of the fears I had with people kind of discovering it and being able to use it. So.
Yeah. And Matei, you added a search and filter guidelines here to the
Yeah, because the two of you talked about search versus filter. So we actually use both at GitLab. And I actually wrote these guidelines, and it was one of the trickiest guidelines that I had to write. So we differentiate them by how users interact with them. You could call them search and filter. We just call them search by type or search by, what is it? Confirmation or something like that. So the confirmation is where you need to press a button to actually trigger the search, right? Yeah, confirmation. So we use both, but we use them very inconsistently, and we haven't replaced existing search boxes with the actual ones, right? Because the search by confirmation has a button, the other one doesn't. So that alone should kind of indicate if the button is present, you need to press it. If it's not present, it will filter as you type, right? But we need to, as we do now, have this epic for button migration. At some point, we will need to replace all these search boxes so that they actually use the component that we built, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Just the same, it's not just the interaction, but also the placement in the page, or, you know, like what you're saying, if it has a trigger, yes or no. And I think I saw an issue that you opened also a couple of, maybe a year ago, that was about replacing or improving the positioning of buttons, like the submit button in settings. That's another thing that I've seen. And I think it will be nice for us to, at some point, knowing that, okay, we have a vision or for the pattern or for the interactions we want, and then do something similar to the migration or the UI polish, where we can tackle this small design improvements, which are actually listed. I have yes, here. I have an epic for bugs. I'm gonna drop here in the agenda and also in the chat. This epic here that lists all the existing and the bugs, UX depth, UI polish, anyways, things that need visual improvement that will improve the user experience, and don't necessarily need a designer to sign off. So they're mostly, button is misaligned, you know, copy is unclear. So if you have anything that is in your stage group that you think would fit here for settings, feel free to add to this bucket. But also, if you think that with your next work on settings, you can pick up some of these issues and make improvements, and just have a conversation with your PMs. I think that would also help a lot, because similar to the migration and the UI polish efforts, these are here. We just need people to prioritize them, and I think that's a challenge when no one owns the thing, right? It just
exactly.
just there sitting.
It was the same with navigation.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I gotta drop, guys. I have so many questions, but if you can find any other issues, or if you think of anything else that will be valuable here, please either add to the agenda doc or to the main epic so that other people can see as well. And then end of this week, I'll try to put together some thoughts and cross-reference some of these topics related to settings, and I'll share with the broader group. But please feel free to collaborate.
That's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.